Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and I am sitting in my studio office. I've been watching William Barr, Attorney General, try to improve Trump's re-election chances by calling on the evangelicals and conservative Roman Catholics to vote for him again in 2020 by not so subtly attacking secular people, liberals, progressives, who he says are trying to use their influence to not only drive religion from the scene in America, but to suppress it, and worse than that, undo democracy itself, goodness, virtue, by teaching evolution, being secular, and all the rest of us. We've heard this before, but not from an attorney general. Imagine if a Jewish attorney general or a Catholic attorney general got up and attacked other people's religions in the name of the Justice Department, what the reaction would be. Here we have someone, a conservative Roman Catholic, not a particularly well-educated one either, typical of a lawyer, has done some reading at some point, maybe First Things magazine or Commentary back in the days when Norm Podhoretz was running it, is the disciple of people like the late Richard John Newhouse or my father, Francis Schaeffer, the evangelical, who used to talk like this as well in the 70s and 80s when he was leading the religious right. So I want to go through his speech, as it were, annotating it, stopping it every now and again to make a little comment and tell you what he really said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Tom, for your kind introduction. Bill and Roger, it's good to be with you also. Your Honors, Your Excellency, friends from the Notre Dame community, I do feel a special connection with Notre Dame. I did have, one of my uncles went to Notre Dame, and my youngest daughter, Margaret, went to Notre Dame. Two of my nephews went to Notre Dame. In fact, their father, my brother Stephen Barr, is here and is at Notre Dame, I think, for a semester, right, Steve? He's the smart one in the family. He's a theoretical particle physicist, and he writes a lot about the relationship between science and physics. So I'm glad to get to see him. I don't get to see him that often. I'd like to thank Notre Dame Law School and the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture for graciously extending this invitation to speak to you. And I'm looking forward after this speech to answering questions. I'd like to thank Tony DeNicola, whose generous support has shaped and continues to shape countless minds through examination of the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition. When my daughter Meg, after she graduated and ultimately went to law school, she became very ill for a period of time, and I knew there were great kids at Notre Dame, people of great character, and for a long period of time there was always one of her classmates visiting us. They worked it out so there was always someone coming to visit us while she was being treated in the hospital and so forth. And we got very close to all her friends, and we loved them to death. And Notre Dame will always have a special place in my heart because of that. I have 5 grandchildren now with another on the way, and I'd be very proud if they all end up at Notre Dame. Meg, incidentally, recovered and got married recently. She got married on December 8th, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and the day before I got a call from the president who was walking out to the helicopters, and he said, "Bill, I know we talked about putting the announcement off until after your daughter's wedding, but I'd sort of like to do it today if it's okay with you, but it's totally up to you." And I said, "Well, Mr. President, we talked about it, and whatever suits you, we'll adjust to. That'll be fine." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll do it now while I'm walking out to the helicopters." So I turned on I was, lounging around in my study at home, and I turned on the television, and it was sort of the first of a number of outer-body experiences I've had since, because he walks over and he goes, I'm selecting Bill Barr to be Attorney General of the United States. And that was the day before, that was Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, and the next day was my daughter's wedding, and she said to me, Pop, you're the only guy I know who would upstage his daughter at her wedding. But when I gave the toast, I said, Meg, it's okay, because just as the Barr name is going to be dragged through the mud, you're changing your name to McGaughey. Today I would like to share some thoughts with you about religious liberty in America. It's an important priority in this administration and for this Department of Justice. We've set up a task force within the department in which all the various components that have equities in this area, the Solicitor General's Office, the Civil Division, the Office of Legal Counsel, and other offices are all represented. And we have regular meetings, and we keep an eye out for cases or events around the country where states are misapplying the Establishment Clause in a way that discriminates against people of faith, or cases where states adopt laws that impinge upon the free exercise of religion.
Barr says that he has told the folks that work for him in the U.S. government to keep an eye out, to react to any time they think religion, in other words, white evangelical religion and conservative Roman Catholic religion, isn't being given a fair shake. In other words, he admits at the beginning of this talk that his bias is in favor of religion rather than in favor of the rule of law.
From the founding era onward, there was strong consensus about the centrality of religious liberty in the United States. The imperative of protecting religious freedom was not just a nod in the direction of piety. It reflects the framers' belief that religion was indispensable to sustaining our free system of government. In his renowned 1785 pamphlet, Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments, James Madison described religious liberty as a right towards men, but a duty towards the Creator, and a duty precedent, both in order of time and degree of obligation, to the claims of civil society. It has been over 230 years since that small group of colonial lawyers led a revolution and launched what they viewed as a great experiment, establishing a society fundamentally different than anything that had come before. They crafted a magnificent Charter of Freedom, the United States Constitution, which provides for limited government while leaving the people broadly at liberty to pursue their lives both as individuals and through their free associations. This quantum leap in liberty has been the mainspring of unprecedented human progress, not only for Americans, but for people around the world. In the 20th century, our form of free society faced a severe test. There's always been the question whether a democracy so solicitous of individual freedom could stand up against the regimented totalitarian state. That question was answered with a resounding yes, as the United States stood up against and defeated first fascism and then communism.
Barr talks about America standing up and defeating fascism and communism as a testimony to somehow what religious liberty did in the United States. This is the Attorney General who serves a president who used a bigoted religious test to keep Muslims out of this country, and who called his fellow Roman Catholics, I don't mean Trump, but Barr's fellow Roman Catholics and Pentecostal Christians, people who come from shithole countries, and who are rapists and killers and have to be kept out with a wall because they're brown, actually, in fact, is what Trump's problem was. Rather than being a country that embraces religious liberty, President Trump, who Barr serves and is trying to get reelected with this speech by calling out religious people to vote for him as if somehow only Trump is going to defend their freedoms, has served a presidency that has been anti-religious liberty to a degree that no presidency in this country ever has been, with his bigotry against particular religions, Muslims, but also liberal Christians, Catholic and Protestant, who are affronted by this president. And when he talks about defeating fascism, the fascism that was defeated in Europe had been embraced by Barr's Roman Catholic Church in Germany, where they had made the Heil Hitler sign. There are pictures of the bishops saluting Hitler, and where the Lutheran Church, with a few exceptions, had sold out, where Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor who stood up against Hitler, was murdered, but most evangelical Protestant pastors went along with Hitler. So the very fascism that Barr says America defeated because of its view of religion is a fascism that was put in place by religion in Europe, including the acquiescence of the Pope with fascism, and Mussolini in Italy, Hitler's great ally. And so for Barr to pit religious liberty from a conservative Roman Catholic point of view against America in its time of struggle with fascism is horrible. An honest Roman Catholic or an honest evangelical Christian would stand up and say, mea culpa. My religion sold out the principles of the American Constitution time and again in Europe, and then in America itself with its sympathies with fascism of so many conservative Roman Catholics and conservative evangelical Christians in the World War II era, who often were the backbone of the fascist sympathizers at that time. In the same way that someone from the left would stand up and admit that in the 1930s and 40s, the backbone of American left-wing politics often was that of liberals who were too soft on not just communism, but who lied about Joseph Stalin and what he was doing and covered up the fact of the utter failures on human rights of the left. So the point being here that to pit religious people against secular, secular against religious, as if one or the other had an end run on human rights is ridiculous. The problem is the failings of the human race in general, to which religion is no solution, obviously, if we look at the history.
But in the 21st century, we face an entirely different kind of challenge. The challenge we face is precisely what the Founding Fathers foresaw would be the supreme test of a free society. They never thought that the main danger of the Republic would come from external foes. The central question was whether, over the long haul, we the people could handle freedom. The question was whether the citizens in such a free society could maintain the moral discipline and virtue necessary for the survival of free institutions. By and large, the founding generation's view of human nature was drawn from the classical Christian tradition. These practical statesmen understood that individuals, while having the potential for great good, also had the capacity for great evil. Men are subject to powerful passions and appetites, and if unrestrained, are capable of ruthlessly riding roughshod over their neighbors and the community at large. No society can exist without some means of restraining individual rapacity. But if you rely on the coercive power of the government to impose those restraints, the framers believed, this would inevitably lead to a government that is too controlling, and you would end up with no liberty, just tyranny.
Barr has the effrontery to talk about rapacity and undisciplined personal character. What he just said sounds as if he's describing Donald Trump, the pimp president, the payer of whores and porn stars from the Oval Office with checks to silence them, the man who assaulted women and never apologized, who said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. the man who turned over the Kurdish and Christian minority in Syria to an Islamist thug for liquidation, the man who liberated ISIS from the camps that 10,000 Kurds died to put them in, the man whose personal morality extends to 3 marriages, endless philandering, thousands of well-documented lies, the man that Trump is, could be described no better than in what Barr talked about when he says men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains upon their own appetites. Who has put less chains on their personal appetites than Donald Trump? Who represents the seamy side of the human race more than Donald Trump? The fact that Barr can say this without just throwing up at the podium or walking out on his own speech shows a depravity in his own character that very few people sink to. It would be as if someone had stood up in the Chancellery in the Reichstag in 1935 and railed against the anti-Semites and then gone and worked for Hitler. It's absurd. It's horrible. This man is the lowest of the low, someone who is a conservative Roman Catholic breaking his own rules of a call to a moral standard by serving a man who has taken this country lower than any president in American history. Barr is a disgusting individual, and there's no other way to say it. I'm sorry, but with leadership like this, America is in a swamp of the very immorality and license that Barr is fulminating against as a manifestation of secularism, which it is not, from a religious point of view. He makes common cause with the pedophile priests here who talk from their pulpit but rape little children backstage. This is a level of hypocrisy the likes of which the United States has almost never seen before.
On the other hand, unless you had some effective restraint, you end up with something equally dangerous: licentiousness, the unbridled pursuit of personal appetites at the expense of the common good. This is just another form of tyranny, where the individual is enslaved by his appetites and the possibility of any healthy community life crumbles. Edmund Burke summed up this point in his typically colorful language. Men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put chains upon their own appetites. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power be placed somewhere, and less of it there is within, the more of it there must be without. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions forge their fetters.
How could you describe Donald Trump better than Burke, who has talked about people who have no personal moral parameters? Burke also said, famously said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. What would be a more apt description of the Republican sycophants like Barr, who have gone along with Trump from the beginning of his presidency, and now, in the case of Barr, are trying to call on religious conservatives to rise up and vote for him in spite of everything, by this not too subtle message saying that secularism leads to decadence and violence. And by the way, all the numbers point in the opposite direction. The mass shootings approved by the Republican Party through the gun lobby and the NRA aside, America is far less violent in terms of criminality than it has been for a long, long time. But that aside, the hypocrisy of someone standing up and questioning the secular or the liberals in America or the progressives based on Edmund Burke's quotes about reining in personal passions, who serves the president who has less of a curb on his tongue, less of a curb on his mind, less of a curb on the zipper of his trousers, less of a curb on where his hands go up women's skirts than any person who's ever sat in the White House. And for Barr to stand up at Notre Dame University and present himself as a serious Roman Catholic theologian and philosopher here, calling on America to vote for a president that will guarantee religious liberties, when it comes to really being a guarantee to white nationalism and the gun-toting hordes of the unwashed mob that follow Donald Trump to his rallies. When you put these images together, just think for a moment of Barr standing here talking this way, and then what Trump actually has represented to this country.
So the founders decided to take a gamble, and they called it a great experiment. They would leave the people broad liberty, they would limit the coercive power of the government, and they would place their trust in the self-discipline and virtue of the American people. In the words of Madison, we have staked our future on the ability of each of us to govern ourselves. And this is really what they meant by self-government. It did not mean primarily the mechanics by which we select a representative legislature. It referred to the capacity of each individual to restrain and govern themselves. But what was the source of this internal controlling power? In a free republic, those restraints could not be handed down from above by philosopher kings. Instead, social order must flow up from the people themselves, freely obeying the dictates of inwardly possessed and commonly shared moral values. And to control willful human beings with an infinite capacity to rationalize, those moral values must rest on authority independent of men's wills. They must flow from the transcendent supreme being. In short, in the framers' view, free government was only suitable and sustainable for a religious people, a people who recognized that there was a transcendent moral order antecedent to both the state and to man-made laws, and had the discipline to control themselves according to those enduring principles. As John Adams put it, we have no government armed with a power which is capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion.
Imagine Barr having the effrontery to quote John Adams, that moral, upstanding paragon married to Abigail Adams, both of which who wrote letters to Jefferson upbraiding him for owning slaves, for raping his slave girl and making her, at age 14, his mistress and pregnant. Imagine Barr standing up here and talking about our founders as moral paragons who counted on religion when the deeply religious South, in every plantation, the master of the house was raping children and having babies of mixed race to his slaves and then selling them on. His wife was putting up with this as part of traditional Christian morality. Imagine Barr harking back to the age in which we talked about the freedom of the individual, theoretically on paper, while enslaving people, while massacring Native Americans, and holding this era up as one we should return to: mass murder and genocide, slavery. Imagine the hypocrisy of someone who serves President Trump talking about a morality that is resting on a religion where Trump is being blessed by the con artists, evangelical leaders like Jerry Falwell Jr., Ralph Reed, Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, and others who have latched onto him as an access to power, Dr. Robert Jeffress from Dallas First Baptist, all of whom talk about Trump in terms of him being sent to lead by God. Well, if that's God's leadership, then God is Satan. And when Barr talks about his favorite era of American history and the paragons of morality and righteousness based on Christianity, traditional Christianity, those traditional Christians were the slaveholders. They were raping children on plantations. If this is the era we are to return to, then indeed let us make a fascist salute and move on with the liquidation of brown people, the re-enslavement of the blacks. Or maybe we should just betray the Kurds and the Christians, the Syriac Christians, Barr's fellow Roman Catholics in northern Syria, to a Kurdish who were defended by the Kurds, to the Turkish Islamist radical Erdogan, because the paragon of Christian morality has a real estate deal with them. That's the world Barr's actually describing. And to drag John Adams into it makes me physically, violently feel ill. Of all people, Adams, who stood up against those of his own moment in time who were slaveholders. Abigail Adams, who was incensed at what was going on in the South and felt such deep pain within her and spoke out.
Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And as Father John Courtney Murray observed, the American tenet was not that free government is inevitable, only that it is possible, and that its possibility can be realized only when the people as a whole are inwardly governed by the recognized imperatives of the universal moral order. Well, how does religion promote moral discipline and the virtue needed to sustain free government? Well, first, it gives us rules to live by. The founding generation were Christians, and they believed that the Judeo-Christian moral system corresponds to the true nature of man. And those rules speak to man and fulfill man both in his private spiritual life and in his communal life. Those moral precepts start, of course, in Christianity with the two great commandments: to love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself.
Barr stands there and looks at an audience and says that the great commandment to love thy neighbor as thyself is the foundation of Christian morality. Of course, it isn't the foundation of Christian morality. It's the foundation of evolutionary morality, where we learn to live together in small tribes and groups. And if you didn't take care of the person next to you, your tribe failed and died. Because children take a long time to raise. Babies are born prematurely to human beings. They have to be, or they would kill their mothers, and they take years to develop. And so we need community, and evolution has taught us these things. Christianity and other religions merely codified what we have been taught by what is really the driving force of human evolution, and that is the survival of the friendliest and the most cooperative rather than the most domineering. But that's for another time. But the fact is, here, again, the hypocrisy is just boggling. Love thy neighbor as thyself. A man who serves a president, who builds walls, who puts children in cages, who has turned loose the forces of Erdogan in Turkey on Kurds and Christian women and children who are being slaughtered and raped. The man who liberated ISIS from the camps by allowing them to escape. Love thy neighbor as thyself. The man who works with Vladimir Putin and every other worldwide thug while disrespecting our traditional allies who share the Judeo-Christian past that Barr holds up as the epitome of goodness.
But they also include the guidance of natural law, a real transcendent moral order which flows from God's eternal law, the divine wisdom by which the whole of creation is ordered.
Of course, I knew he would talk about natural law. This is this old hoary Roman Catholic canard that goes back to trying to find a rational way to base irrational moral teachings. In other words, naturally we're male and female, so homosexuality or transgender behavior is, quote, unnatural. And of course there is a real natural law, and that is, let's just take this example. Gay people are born gay, and so if religion says they're choosing to be gay and therefore it's a sin, or people choosing to be transgender, whatever it may be, and therefore are sinning, they are really going against natural law. It's called evolution, the understanding of science. But natural law, in the way Barr uses it, is this discredited idea that goes back into a pseudo-intellectualism of Roman Catholics like Barr, who today belong to organizations like Opus Dei and other secretive Roman Catholic organizations trying to impose some sort of idea of morality on society, as if somehow it springs from their God or who they worship as God, when in fact morality is only one thing, and that is we evolved to have empathy with each other, and therefore the survival of the friendliest, the most cooperative rather than the most domineering. This is the lesson of evolution, and it was co-opted and codified by religion at some point into a series of thou shalt nots. But there is no natural law in the sense Barr is talking about it, some omnipotent force from above that has made human beings coalesce into what they are and forces them to be a certain way. Gay people are born gay. That is natural law. They are not going against anything. They are being who they were created and evolved to be. And so the idea that he brings up natural law, perhaps to people who aren't familiar with Roman Catholic theology and the history of Roman Catholicism, would hear this and this phrase would just slide on by. But actually it's an indication that at his heart, Barr is a fascist. He is not a Christian. Barr is someone who adheres to a vision of Roman Catholicism that used to put people at the stake and burn them, and a vision of Roman Catholicism that is fundamentally anti-science, that if we lived by, we would literally be in the pre-Renaissance era of people like Savonarola, that priest in Florence, who got Michelangelo and Leonardo and all these other people, especially the painter Botticelli and others, rose opposing ideas to them and to the Medici family who were backing science and these other things, all in the name of bringing people back to the natural law of God. I forget when the actual phrase came up and was first used by Roman Catholic theologians as a kind of a shorthand for imposing what they viewed as God's law on other people. But Barr is harking back to this, and it's scary for someone who knows the history a little bit and hears the dog whistles implied by this.
The eternal law is impressed upon and reflected in all created things. And from the nature of things we can, through reason and experience, discern standards of right and wrong that exist independent of human will. Now, modern secularists dismiss this idea of morality as sort of otherworldly superstition imposed by a killjoy clergy. But in fact, Judeo-Christian moral standards are the ultimate utilitarian rules for human conduct. They reflect the rules that are best for man, not in the by and by, but in the here and now. They are like God's instruction manual for the best running of man and the best operation of human society. And by the same token, violations of these moral laws have bad real-world consequences for man and for society. We may not pay the price immediately, but over time, the harm is real. Religion also helps promote moral discipline within society. We're all fallen. We don't automatically conform our conduct to moral rules even when we know that they are good for us. But religion helps teach, train, and habituate people to want what is good.
He talks about religion training people to want what is good. That's true. But so do many other forces in our lives. And the reason why religion is able to train people to want what is good is because evolution has given us the capacity for empathy. When religion simply restates the evolutionary obvious, and that is to get on in society and care for others, and to be cared for ourselves, we need to put empathy ahead of personal power over others. The golden rule of doing unto others as we would have them do to us. Religion is speaking truth, but it's speaking truth for the same reason that a stopped clock is right twice a day. And that is, this is simply the way things are, and that's because we evolved to have community in order to be able to raise our children and our families within safety, while others helped care for us as we cared for our families. This is an evolutionary imperative that science has discussed and discovered, and that runs parallel to the development of moral philosophy such as the one that Barr's holding out. But once again here, the hypocrisy of what he's saying is massive. Again, stop for a minute and think of the backdrop. The backdrop is he is trying to prop up a president who flies in the face of all that we know as human beings about empathy with others, who is someone who has no empathy, Barr is using the speech of religion to essentially endorse for re-election a sociopath who denies in his own life and attitude toward others everything that religion and science can agree on, which is that empathy and care for the community should be put ahead of individualism and striving. And when Barr talks about this history of religious involvement, of course, at every point you mark in religious history, you see a flip side where people are not even living by its rules. And so to hold this up as an absolute is an act of tremendous hypocrisy, but it's also an act of stupidity. Barr here is speaking like a simplistic Sunday school teacher about rules, and you have to understand, again, you need to separate what his ideas are from the actual teachings of Christianity. There are many progressive Christians who would be vomiting at this point, thinking about the fact that the tolerance and the forgiveness and the love that is embraced by a tolerant Christianity and that fits in so well with the ideas of a tolerant secularism. For instance, on the environment, caring for our environment. Barr represents a political party at this point, the Republicans, who have done everything they can to deny the truth of climate science. He is standing here in Notre Dame talking about these issues as being ones of religious imperative at the very moment when our entire planet is endangered by the ideas of domination of creation that both Judaism and Christianity and Islam codify within their teachings because they come from a pre-science era. The Koch brothers were propped up by people like William Barr. The gas and oil industry has been propped up by the Republican Party. In the name of what? Certainly not religion of caring for our planet and caring for those around us. And so once again, Barr stands on the deck of the Titanic as it sinks, talking about the masterful ship design of this tremendous creation, the Titanic, without ever mentioning that he can already hear the rush of water under his feet as deck after deck after deck fills with water and the entire ship is sinking.
It does not do this primarily by formal laws, that is, by coercive power. It does this through moral education and by framing society's informal rules, the customs and traditions which reflect the wisdom and experience of the ages. In other words, religion helps frame a moral culture within society that instills and reinforces moral discipline. I think we all recognize that over the past 50 years, religion has been under increasing attack.
He talks about religion over 50 years being under attack. It has not been under attack. What has happened is that with the ascendance of science into areas such as sexuality, biology, how our brains work, neurology, and so forth, we are learning facts about how the human being is actually constructed, which, sadly, for William Barr and others of his ilk, seem to deny superficial renderings of religion such as he holds to, which is this sort of rule book taught by priests in terms of petty moral behavior, masturbation, sexual practices, contraceptives, all this kind of rule book stuff that traditional Roman Catholicism and evangelical Protestantism brings with it. Science has questioned these things. This is not an attack. This is simply an illumination of the truth in the face of grimly holding on to superstition based on a hypocrisy that talks about the golden rule of loving others from a tradition that supported, created, and maintained the slave trade, for instance, or went along with Jews being gassed because they weren't Christians. And so when you look at this, it's with friends like William Barr, evangelical Christianity and traditional Roman Catholicism need no enemies. Because in the mouth of this man, every single platitude he utters is coming from someone defending a president and a Republican regime that is more heartless than any before it, that cares less about God's creation and the environment, that trashes women by name who accuse the president of raping them, credible accusations of rape against the man this person is defending as a defender of Christianity, obliquely saying if you don't re-elect Trump in 2020, things will get worse, there'll be even more secularism and so forth and so on.
On the one hand, we have seen the steady erosion of our traditional Judeo-Christian moral system and a comprehensive effort to drive it from the public square.
He talks about an effort to drive Christian morality from the public square and a steady erosion. Actually, he's completely wrong. With the rise of acceptance and tolerance of gay people and the fight for sexual equality of the LGBTQ community, with the rise of the environmental movement and the defense of our planet and other species in God's creation, it could be argued, and I'm not arguing it here, but it could just as well be argued, and certainly with a lot more veracity, that Christian morality, in the best sense, is actually more dominant now than ever. Because, of course, it is far more moral to care for your environment than destroy it. And all these young people coming out and protesting for the environment and protection of it and life on earth seem to me to be in line a lot more with Jesus Christ and his teachings than anything William Barr is talking about in supporting Donald Trump, who locks children in cages. And the same goes for the sexuality that can be more honestly expressed in this day and age than before. Why should people have to live in a closet because people like William Barr and his pedophile priests and bishops are telling them they are somehow immoral? What is Christian about that? So actually, conversely and ironically, we live in a more Christian era than ever if you take the teachings of Jesus as what Christianity is, rather than the political construct of the Roman Catholic Church William Barr serves, with its top-down bureaucracy and its absolute covering up of this ridiculous celibate priesthood that goes along and molests people and then is defended by the silent church. Is that the idea of morality that we should try to return to?
On the other hand, we see the growing ascendancy of secularism and the doctrine of moral relativism. By any honest assessment, the consequences of this moral upheaval have been grim. Virtually every measure of social pathology continues to gain ground.
In fact, every measure of social pathology has not gained ground, other than the mass shootings supported by the NRA and the gun lobby and the Republican Party. Crime is down in all our big cities. Teen pregnancy rates have been falling steadily now since the 1980s. In fact, sexual celibacy, for reasons other than evangelical and Catholic morality, is in the ascendant for reasons that you could discuss somewhere else. America's water and air were getting cleaner until Donald Trump came along. We have a lot of problems with not just drug dependence, but opioid use and so forth. When William Barr's kind were in charge unchallenged, and the Black American community was suffering from the addiction crisis in the crack epidemic, William Barr and his white fellow travelers were notably silent. Now they pay attention and call it a moral decline because white people with skin the same color as theirs have opiate dependency. Yes, we have social pathologies in this country, but they have very little to do with people going to church or not going to church. What they have to do with is an uncaring society that has smashed the idea of community in a kind of a libertarian individualism that people like Barr believe in, and his fellow travelers, the Koch brothers, paid for with their think tanks and their phony magazines and all the rest of it. It is the very sense of community that has been smashed, not the sense of religion. That's one thing the Puritans got right. I'm sitting in Massachusetts in the Bay State Colony. They would have hated what Barr's idea of Christianity was, where they had common greens open to everybody to graze their cattle, where you got fined if you didn't take care of your neighbor, and so forth. It is the idea of community that has been going away, and if that's being reinvented anywhere, it is by the young. Again, look at the environmental movement. It's the exact opposite. Barr's not only lying, he's lying so bold-facedly. It has been the decline of the oppression that he calls Christianity, which is not actually a true Christianity, that has led to more community and more responsibility for each other. And so Barr is not just lying here, he's lying on a Trumpian level. I'd like to point that out.
In 1965, the illegitimacy rate was 8%. The last time I was Attorney General in 1992, it was at 25%. Today, it is at over 40%, and that's the national average. In many of our large urban areas, as we know, it is well over 70%.
Barr talks about the illegitimacy rate. The use of that language implies that the people born to single mothers, for instance, and he talks about the urban areas, which is code word for Black America. Bending these terms around are, again, dog whistle terms for people who believe that, quote, traditional marriage, one man, one woman, et cetera, is somehow ordained by God, and who invented words like bastards to describe children born outside wedlock. It harks back to an era that, fortunately, we've grown beyond. I happen to be a proponent of households where families stay intact, whether that's two lesbian mothers or a gay male couple or any other construct, as being better than single parenthood. I don't mean better morality-wise, but better for the child, better for the parent, because we all need help. It has nothing to do with morality. It's that babies take a long time to raise, and a mom by herself or a father by himself has less resources. But Barr presides over the attorney generalship for a party right now with Donald Trump that has cut services, that has raised taxes on middle-class people by cutting them for billionaires, who launched a trade war that has hurt our economy for ordinary working people. And instead of doing something about this, for instance, medical care for all, Medicare for all, Medicaid for all, whatever it might be, whatever the solution is, he talks about individual responsibility of people cut adrift from all social community, as if somehow this isn't ideal. Again, you can't have it both ways. If you're going to talk about basic Christian morality of caring for others, and then on the other hand simply cut taxes for billionaires, and the idea being that people have to have some inner moral responsibility, where as Ayn Randian type free-for-all of libertarianism, you function by yourself with no help from the community, the larger community, which, by the way, we call government when it comes to local towns, cities, villages, the federal government, whatever. This is simply a term we use for community. When Barr pits individual conscience against a wider community participation and responsibility for others, he's basically telling everybody, look, you're on your own. We're not going to help you. And it's in that context that single motherhood, for instance, becomes problematic. But it's a problem we've created by smashing community, by putting the philosophy of people like Ayn Rand and the adoration of billionaires ahead of caring for ordinary people. That's the problem.
Along with the wreckage of the family, we are seeing record levels of depression and mental illness. Dispirited young people, soaring suicide rates, increasing numbers of angry and alienated young males, an increase in senseless violence, and a deadly drug epidemic.
As he lists these social pathologies, every single one of them can be attributed to one thing and one thing only, and that is the embrace of rapacious, individualistic capitalism without bounds. This is the world that Ayn Rand created. This is the world that the Koch brothers created. This is the world that successive Republican administrations that have lowered taxes for the rich and leveled a stagnating middle class into oblivion have created. The alienation he talks about comes from people who move 10 or 12 times in a lifetime for job opportunities with no child care, no help from anybody. The traditional family has indeed been smashed, but it hasn't been smashed by secular science. It has been smashed by the Republican Party. It has been smashed by people like Ayn Rand, who glorified individualistic enterprise. It is now being smashed by people like the Amazon Corporation and Facebook and all the others who have been diving in to the capitalism without conscience model. And this is the world that Barr serves. The world of money, the world of power, the world portrayed in the HBO series Succession, of families like the Murdochs and the Kochs and others being given free rein to manipulate the rest of us. This is the world Barr is part of, upholding right now, and to stand and list the social pathologies as somehow the fault of secular science should make you throw up.
As you know, over 70,000 people die a year from drug overdoses. That is more casualties in a year than we experienced during the entire Vietnam War. I won't dwell on the bitter results of the new secular age. Suffice it to say that the campaign to destroy the traditional moral order has coincided, and I believe has brought with it immense suffering and misery. And yet the forces of secularism, ignoring these tragic results, press on with even greater militancy. Among the militant secularists are many so-called progressives. But where is the progress? We are told we are living in a post-Christian era. But what has replaced the Judeo-Christian moral system?
He talks about the Judeo-Christian moral system and glosses over the term and uses it as if we all agree on what it means. Stop. There is indeed a Judeo-Christian moral system, and it reflects the best of what evolution has taught us when it comes to caring for others. But what has been lost is the sense of community in this Judeo-Christian moral system that indeed did have a positive aspect to it, but has been replaced by a rapacious capitalism which Barr serves to the point when he lists the social pathologies of drug addiction, for instance. Notice he glosses over another statistic that kills more people than the Vietnam War did, and that is gun deaths. Now, those guns are owned by evangelical white Christians and conservative Roman Catholics who overlap in numbers exactly with the NRA and the Republican Party and the gun lobby. Where is Barr's compassion for all the people who have committed suicide using a firearm? Where is Barr's compassion for the children shot by siblings by mistake as they pick up a father's loaded handgun? Or the black man shot down in his own home by a white cop? Barr is selective in his social pathologies, because if he actually listed all of them, and boy do we have some, from opioid addiction to suicide, you would have to include the horror that has been meted out to our society, not just in the mass gun violence of the shootings in schools and other places, but the horror of worshiping violent firearms with maximum capacity and muzzle velocity, weapons of war that Barr and his ilk have made sure are in the hands of the most deranged parts of our culture. And when Barr talks about secularism, it's his code word for selectively picking the bits and pieces of science he likes and maintaining them, but getting rid of the ones he doesn't like. In other words, let's use science in oil drilling for the Koch brothers, etc., but let's forget about what science teaches about homosexuality and gay people and transgender people. Let's forget what it teaches about community and schools and education, and rather replace that with homeschoolers or religious education that flies in the face of science. And let's ignore climate change. Let's ignore climate change. Let's ignore climate change, because it gets in the way of the libertarian free-for-all that Barr interprets as a civil society.
What is it that can fill the spiritual void in the hearts of the individual person? And what is the system of values that can sustain human social life? The fact is that no secular creed has emerged capable of performing the role of religion. Scholarship suggests that religion has been integral to the development and thriving of Homo sapiens since we emerged roughly 50,000 years ago. And it is just for the past few hundred years that we've embarked on this experiment of living without religion. We hear much today about our humane values, But in the final analysis, what undergirds these values? What commands our adherence to them? What we call values today is really nothing more than mere sentimentality, still drawing on the vapor trails of Christianity. Now, there have been times and places where the traditional moral order has been shaken in the past. In the past, societies like the human body seem to have a self-healing mechanism, a self-correcting mechanism that gets things back on course if things go too far. The consequences of moral chaos become too pressing. The opinion of decent people rebels. They coalesce and rally against obvious excess. Periods of moral retrenchment follow periods of excess. This is the idea of the pendulum. And we've all thought to ourselves, after a while the pendulum will swing back. But today we face something different that may mean that we cannot count on the pendulum swinging back. First is the force, fervor, and comprehensiveness of the assault on organized religion we are experiencing today.
He talks about the assault on organized religion. He's right, because there has been an assault on pedophile priests, on Protestant televangelists who rake in millions of dollars from susceptible, ignorant people and build personal financial empires of the kind that Franklin Graham has built, that Jerry Falwell Jr. has built, the kind that Ralph Reed has built. And these are the servants of Donald Trump, who Barr is trying to keep in office with this talk, and with his connection with other conservative, far-right Roman Catholics in their secretive organizations. When you look at what is going on here, when you look at where we are as a society, you have to understand that what William Barr is describing here is not anything to do with religion per se, but to do with the way we describe morals. Do we describe them as the product of evolution that has taught us that the survival of the friendliest, that cooperation is better than domination and oppression? Or do we call morals a series of rules dictated by prophets, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or whoever it might be? Now, in my mind, I happen to be someone who goes to church on Sunday. I go to a Greek Orthodox church with my grandchildren. The two can coexist in a friendly mystery that we call human progress. But to Barr, you have to have everything out of a little black book with gold lettering for it to be official. For me, the very reality around us teaches us something about how to relate to other people. But again, that's a discussion for another time. The problem here is that when William Barr talks about religion providing a framework, the failure of religion to provide that framework is exactly what led to the Enlightenment, and then people like Voltaire, in the name of human progress, being critics of the oppression that had come about by the official Roman Catholic Church, and their hypocrisy in that day as well as our own. The world Barr describes never existed. There never was a moral order brought about by Christianity at any point. Touch it where you will. Are we talking about the era of slavery? Are we talking about the Roman Catholic Church that propped up Hitler? Are we talking about a point in time in the Middle Ages where the superstition taught by the church put witches on top of bonfires? Where are we looking at this moment of moral clarity? What you always see is moral clarity interpreted by hypocrisy. The church-going Southern belle who has to live with her husband raping the slave children on her own plantation at the same time be a Southern lady. That's the world that Barr finds more comfortable, not me. I think we should just put it all out in the open. Let's talk about the failures of the left in coddling Stalin and Mao Zedong and the stupid American communists that went along with it and covered for them. Let's talk about the failures of the Roman Catholic Church in this country to do anything about their insane celibacy policy that turns so many priests into rapists of children. Let's talk honestly about all of our moral failures, the stupidity of the left on college campuses that tries to shut down free speech and create safe spaces. Let's be honest. Nobody has an angle. Nobody has a percentage on this. Nobody has a corner on the market of virtue. We're all in the same boat, and we're slowly evolving together to find a better way, and that's called cooperation instead of domination. The kind of domination Trump serves, the kind of domination Barr serves as he props up this pig, Donald Trump, and all his immoral lasciviousness, that by anybody's standards, secular or religious, is disgusting. And that is who he serves through these words. When you watch him talk, just remember, think of the big portrait of Donald Trump behind him, grabbing a woman's crotch at a dinner table without her permission. That is the context in which this moralizing is occurring.
This is not decay. This is organized destruction. Secularists and their allies have marshaled all the forces of mass communication, popular culture, the entertainment industry, and academia in an unremitting assault on religion and traditional values.
This is the ultimate conspiracy theory. I have never been to that secularist back room where the media and scientists and academic people and secularists and liberals get together to discuss their assault. This is the talk of right-wing talk radio, of conspiracy theorists. And this is what I guess is produced by old-fashioned conservative Roman Catholics in service of unbridled capitalism when they get together in back rooms of organizations like Opus Dei and discuss the world as if it's one vast conspiracy theory versus another. This is high school sophomoric garbage. There are no conspiracy theories that hold up. The only conspiracy going on here is a man who might know better if he actually read any of the Roman Catholic theology that he's purporting to quote here in service of the most disgusting anti-Roman Catholic pig that's ever lived, and that's Donald Trump. And when I say anti-Roman Catholic, I mean anti-anything, anti-Muslim, anti-secular, anti-clerical, anti-science, because Trump is all about personal ego over all other considerations. And how can anyone stand up and talk about morality who serves someone like this?
These instruments are used not only to affirmatively promote secular orthodoxy, but also to drown out and silence opposing voices and to attack viciously and hold up to ridicule any dissidents. One of the ironies, as some have observed, is that the secular project has itself become a religion pursued with religious fervor. It is taking on all the trappings of religion, including inquisitions and excommunication. Those who defy the creed risk a figurative burning at the stake, social, educational, and professional ostracism, and exclusion waged through lawsuits and savage social media campaigns. The pervasiveness and the power of our high-tech popular culture fuels apostasy in other ways. It provides an unprecedented degree of distraction. Part of the human condition has been that there usually has been no way to avoid the big questions that stare us in the face. Are we created, or are we purely material accidents? Does our life have any meaning or purpose? But as Blaise Pascal observed, instead of grappling with these questions, many human beings are easily distracted from thinking about the final things. And indeed, we now live in the age of distraction, where we can envelop ourselves in a world of digital stimulation and universal connectivity. And we have almost limitless ways of indulging all our physical appetites.
Barr talks about indulging our appetites and limitless distraction while serving the president whose entire existence lives on Twitter. What can I say? You know, no one more than me has written about Facebook and the digital media and the sadness of seeing a parent tweeting while their child stands next to them and they're not making eye contact, kids alone in their rooms with social media. We all know this is destructive, and there's a whole movement, by the way, a science-based movement, moving against it in terms of neurology studies and the rest of what overexposure to digital media does to kids in isolating them, etc., etc. But again, Barr is setting forth this vision of being a moral paragon to instruct the rest of us while serving a president who is social media. He is a reality TV star. He is the president of social media, the president of reality TV star, the president of social distraction, the president of the tweet. And for Barr to stand up here and talk about social pathology of mass entertainment, which by the way is real, but for him to try to corral that discussion into this one while propping up again Donald Trump, genuinely is a level of hypocrisy that boggles the mind. The only reason we have President Trump is because of social distraction on one hand, white evangelical conservative Christians that Barr is reaching out to here to vote again for this man on the other hand, having taken their social litmus tests of abortion and other issues and put them ahead of the good of the country. And so just keep saying to yourself as you watch this, what is this in service of? It is in service of a personality cult that depends on the social distraction of the entertainment business, entertainment news business, entertainment tweet business, entertainment Facebook business, etc., 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 that has replaced a lot of more social discourse of the very kind that goes on in universities and in the more thoughtful media that Barr is railing against as if they are a conspiracy against his man that he serves as a sycophant.
There's another modern phenomenon that is suppressing society's self-corrective mechanism that's making it harder for us to restore ourselves. In the past, when societies are threatened by moral chaos, the overall social costs of licentiousness and irresponsible personal conduct become so high that society ultimately recoils and reevaluates the path it is on. But today, in the face of all the increasing pathologies, instead of addressing the underlying cause, we have cast the state in the role of the alleviator of bad consequences. We call on the state to mitigate the social costs of personal misconduct and irresponsibility. So the reaction to growing illegitimacy is not sexual responsibility, but abortion. The reaction to drug addiction is safe injection sites. The solution to the breakdown of the family is for the state to set itself up as an ersatz husband for the single mother and an ersatz father for the children. The call comes for more and more social programs to deal with this wreckage. And while we think we're solving problems, we are underwriting them. We start with an untrammeled freedom, and we end up as dependents of a coercive state on whom we depend. Interestingly, this idea of the state as the alleviator of bad consequences has given rise to a new moral system that goes hand in hand with the secularization of society. It can be called a system of macro-morality, and in some ways it is an inversion of Christian morality. Christianity teaches a micro-morality. We transform the world by focusing on our own personal morality and transformation.
I would just like to shout out from the audience, you mean like Donald Trump does? You mean the way he focuses on his personal morality to transform society around him when he names people who have said he raped them and mocks them publicly from the office of the president? Is this what you're talking about? Or are you talking about the conservative Roman Catholic Church that transformed morality around them by covering up the molesting and the rape of tens of thousands of children around the world? Or what was happening in Ireland before people began to repudiate the power of the Roman Catholic Church there, where people were taken away as children from their mothers if they were illegitimate and put in homes where the nuns beat them, and when they finally died because they failed to thrive, in other words, were starved to death, they were thrown into the sewage behind the orphanage? Is that what you're talking about? Come on, William Barr. If we're going to start talking about personal morality transforming the world, the utter failure of the Roman Catholic Church you belong to, the utter failure of the evangelical movement, which has been the harbinger of racism throughout the South and the defender of apartheid in South Africa, comes to mind. Again, let's all be honest. The left also fails. There's a nugget of truth in what you talk about in terms of intolerance on campus and so forth and so on. But that's a human problem. It's not a secular problem. Just like the problems of the Roman Catholic Church are a human problem. They're not a religious problem. What comes first? The problem is you never define your terms. The truth of the matter is the human condition is one that is imperfect. And so whether you're a religious person or a secular person, you will be imperfect. Whether the state is trying to solve problems or the church is trying to solve problems, it will be imperfect. But we are all in the same boat. So to divide us into religious, Christian, authoritarian, white, black, fascist, libertarian, and so forth and so on is not the way to look at the human race. We are all in the same prediction. The point is, do we try to dominate others or do we try to cooperate with them? That is the bottom line. That is the question, whatever the label you're putting on it. So enough of this categorization of religion and secularism as if they are opposing forces. We are human beings, and our problems stem from that. Everything else is simply a label we use to describe that problem.
The new secular religion teaches macro morality. One's morality is not gauged by their private conduct, but rather their commitment to political causes and collective action to address various social problems. This system allows us not to worry so much about the strictures on our own private lives, because we can find salvation on the picket line. We can signal our finely tuned moral sensibilities by participating in demonstrations on this cause or on that. Something happened recently that crystallized this difference between these competing moral systems. I was attending Mass at a parish I did not usually attend in Washington, D.C. And at the end of Mass, the chairman of the Social Justice Committee got up to give his report to the parish. And he pointed to the growing homeless problem in D.C. and explained that more mobile soup kitchens were needed to feed them. This being a Catholic church, I expected him to call for volunteers to go out and provide for this need as volunteers. But instead, he recounted all the visits that the committee members had made to the D.C. government to lobby for higher taxes and more spending to fund mobile soup kitchens. A third phenomenon which makes it difficult for the pendulum to swing back is the way the law is being used as a battering ram to break down traditional moral values and to establish moral relativism as the new orthodoxy. Law is being used in a couple of ways. First, either through legislation, but more frequently through judicial interpretation, the forces of secularism have been continually seeking to eliminate laws that reflect traditional moral norms. At first, this involved rolling back laws that prohibited certain kinds of conduct, hence the watershed decision legalizing abortion, and since then the legalization of euthanasia, and the list goes on, as we all know. More recently, we have seen the law used aggressively to force religious people and entities to subscribe to practices and policies that are antithetical to their faith. The problem is not that religion is being forced on others. The problem is that irreligion is being forced. Secular values are being forced on people of faith. This reminds me of the way Roman emperors just couldn't leave the minority of Christians in the empire alone, although they were loyal to the emperor. They couldn't leave them in peace. They would mandate that they had to violate their conscience by offering religious sacrifice to the emperor as a god. Similarly today, militant secularists do not have a live and let live spirit. They are not content to leave religious people alone to practice their faith. Instead, they seem to take delight in compelling people to violate their conscience. For example, the last administration sought to force religious employers including Catholic religious orders, to violate their sincerely held religious views by funding contraceptive and abortifacient coverage in their health plans. And similarly, recently, California has sought to require pro-life pregnancy centers to provide notices of abortion rights. This refusal to accommodate the free exercise of religion is relatively recent. Just 25 years ago, there was a broad consensus in our society that our laws should accommodate religious belief. In 1993, Congress passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The purpose of the statute was to promote maximum accommodation to religion when the government adopted broad policies that might impinge on religious practice. And at the time, this was not controversial. It was introduced by Chuck Schumer with 170 co-sponsors in the House, and it was introduced by Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch with 59 co-sponsors in the Senate, and it passed the Senate by 97-3. But recently, as the process of secularization has accelerated, this statute has come under assault, and the idea of religious accommodation is falling out of favor. Because this administration firmly supports accommodation of religion, the battleground at this time has largely shifted to the states. Some state governments are now attempting to compel religious individuals and entities to subscribe to practices or to espouse viewpoints that are incompatible with their religion. Ground zero for these attacks on religion are the schools, and to me, this is the most serious challenge to religious liberty today. For anyone who has a religious faith, by far the most important part of exercising that faith is teaching that religion to your children, the passing on of the faith. There is no greater gift we can give our children and no greater expression of love. And for the government to interfere in that process is a monstrous invasion of religious liberty.
This whole stretch of Barr's speech is his pitch, his electioneering pitch for Donald Trump for the 2020 election. Make no mistake. He is telling conservative evangelicals and Roman Catholics, we will represent you, we will support you, we are your friend, we are the enemy of anyone who disagrees with you, and we will use the full law of the Justice Department, the full weight of the law of the presidency, the full weight of the law of our domination of the Senate, whatever it might be, or local state houses, to help you maintain your, quote, values in your home. And he talks about it as religious liberty. Roll the clock back to Barr's objection to, quote, secularists. In other words, anybody who believes that the rule of law has to be above our individual whims or superstitions, imposing their view on religious people. This was exactly the argument of the segregationists in the South. This was exactly the argument of the slaveholders in the South. It was the imposition of northern secular values on the God-fearing slaveholding South, northern secular values of integration. It was the imposition of the rule of law above religious superstition that they objected to. They argued their case on exactly the same basis, that he is arguing against women's rights or reproductive rights, and that he is arguing in trying to defend, for instance, homeschoolers that brainwash their children to become the sort of neo-fascist troops that wear red hats now and run around the country screaming in people's faces open carry laws for their guns based on their religious civil liberties, which they now interpret as Second Amendment rights, etc. Listen, William Barr, we've heard all this before. What you are really talking about is allowing religion to dictate social policy through the force of law. You are standing there as the Attorney General of the United States that's supposed to represent all of us and defend the rule of law, holding out for religious exceptions. So if there are a group of fundamentalist pastors in Salem today who still believe that witches should be burnt, would we allow them to do so because it is their, quote, sincerely held belief? No, and you know that's an absurd example. But it's not so absurd, because what you were talking about means that gay people have to go back in the closet if they live in a religious community where the sincerely held beliefs of religious people is that you should beat gay people up in gay bars and kill them, or maybe tie them to a fence and crucify them. What you were talking about means that we are giving room to the kind of bigotry that believes that God created separate races and we should all be kept separate, as the entire basis of evangelical, reformed, Calvinist belief provided in South Africa for generations for the murder, enslavement, and oppression of the South African people. The dictates of religion in Israel today mean that fundamentalist Israelis who believe in their version of Jewish religion trumping international law are stealing sections of the West Bank and taking them away from Palestinians because it is their sincerely held belief as Jews that God gave them this land. And so the entire international order is in jeopardy. Erdogan in Turkey, whom your master Trump serves now, as Erdogan tries to revive ISIS by liberating ISIS fighters from their prison camps by killing their Kurdish and Christian guards. He believes in a vision of Islamic dominance over the Middle East and the world, indeed, in a brand new caliphate as he replaces Turkish democracy with Islamism. That too is religion. So let's be honest here, William Barr. What you're talking about is imposing on world society and American culture through the force of law of your office as Attorney General, propping up religious superstition and belief, unfounded belief that is, and attacking scientists, attacking educators, attacking moms and dads and women and black people and brown people, anybody who go against the idea of some religiously imposed test, where you are putting, in the name of religious freedom, actually religious persecution of others above the rule of law. You are a disgrace.
Yet, this is where the battle is being joined, and I see that it's being waged on three fronts. The first front relates to the content of public school curriculum. Many states are adopting curriculum that is incompatible with traditional Judeo-Christian principles, according to which parents are attempting to raise their children. And they often do this without any opt-out provision for religious families. Thus, for example, New Jersey recently passed a law requiring public schools to adopt an LGBT curriculum that many feel is inconsistent with traditional Christian teaching. Similar laws have been passed in California and Illinois. And the Orange County Board of Education in California issued an opinion that, quote, parents who disagree with the instructional material related to gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation may not excuse their children from this instruction. Indeed, in some cases, the schools may not even warn parents about the lessons they plan to teach on controversial subjects relating to sexual behavior and relationships. This puts parents who dissent from the secular orthodoxy to a difficult choice. Try to scrape together enough money to send their kids to private school or homeschooling, or allow their children to be inculcated with messages that they fundamentally reject. The second axis of attack in the realm of education are state policies designed to starve religious schools of generally available funds and encouraging students to choose secular options rather than religious schools. Montana, for example, created a program that provided tax credits to those who donated to a scholarship program that underprivileged students could use to attend private schools. The point of the program was to provide a greater parental and student choice in education and to provide better education to needy youth. But Montana expressly excluded religious-affiliated private schools from the program. And when that exclusion was challenged in courts by parents who wanted to use the scholarship to attend a non-denominational Christian school, the Montana Supreme Court required the state to eliminate the entire program, rather than to allow parents to use the scholarships for religious schools. It justified this action by pointing to a provision in the Montana Constitution, commonly referred to as the Blaine Amendment. Blaine amendments, as many of you know, were passed at a time of rampant anti-Catholic animus in this country and typically disqualify religious institutions from receiving any direct or indirect payment from state funds. The case is now in the Supreme Court, and the Department of Justice has filed a brief explaining why Montana's Blaine Amendment violates the First Amendment. Finally, the third kind of assault on religious freedom in education have been recent efforts to use state laws to force religious schools to adhere to secular orthodoxy. For example, right here in Indiana, a teacher sued the Catholic Archbishop of Indianapolis for directing the Catholic schools within his diocese that they could not employ teachers in same-sex marriages because the example of those same-sex marriages would undermine the school's teaching on the Catholic view of marriage and the complementarity of the sexes. This lawsuit clearly infringes on the First Amendment rights of the Archdiocese by interfering both with its expressive association and with its church autonomy. And the Department of Justice filed a statement of interest in the state court making these points, and we hope that the state court will soon dismiss this case. Taken together, these cases paint a disturbing picture. We see the state requiring local public schools to insert themselves into contentious social debates without regard to the religious views of their students or parents. In effect, these states are requiring local communities to make their public schools inhospitable to families with traditional religious values. Those families are implicitly told that they should conform or leave. At the same time, pressure is placed on religious schools to abandon their religious convictions. Simply because of their religious character, they are starved of funds. Students who would otherwise choose to attend them are told that they may only receive scholarships if they turn their sights elsewhere. And simultaneously, the religious schools are threatened in tort cases, and undoubtedly will be threatened with the denial of accreditation if they adhere to their religious character.
What Barr is describing here is exactly what happened to Jerry Falwell Sr., who was a segregationist and argued for years that the Bible taught segregation, that the division of the races was God ordained, and that it was a matter of his religious liberty to start white Christian academies to counteract the evil of integration of Southern public schools. And in the end, because the state deprived him of funds, he had to suddenly have a moral awakening and change his views and integrate schools, including Liberty Baptist College, which is now Liberty University, run by his fascist Trump lickspittle supporting son, Jerry Falwell Jr. And so I'm sorry, William Barr, the history of progress in this country and moral awakening has always accompanied new forms of thinking, science-based revelation, if you like, from God, if you want it that way, replacing superstitious misinterpretations of the golden rule of Jesus Christ, which is to do unto others as you would be done by. And so you could flip your argument totally and say that actually this, quote, secularist onslaught is the application of actual religious principle in its most fundamental state of caring for others, rather than the other way around. You could say that, thank God, in the name of Jesus Christ, if you're a Christian, for the advance of progressive points of view which actually more closely adhere to the teachings of Jesus and how we treat others than the superficial religiosity you're talking about, your little gold-leafed black book you follow, your missal, your Catholic teachings on, quote, morality, immorality, in other words, of treating gay people like crap, and organizing your religious, quote, freedom around doing harm to the least of these and to those who are around you. It's the other way around, but that's just my point of view. Your point of view is that the state, the force of the state, should enforce religious, quote, morality by the exclusion of others. It was the exclusion of black people, but you lost that fight with integration of the schools. And now you're talking about another awakening to sexual diversity that you're standing against in the name of religious freedom. No, there will not be exclusions. Why should religiously observant people in our culture be exempt from the rule of law? Why should white academies, whites-only academies in the South, get state funding? Why should heterosexual academies in the North get state funding, because that's what you're talking about, heterosexual only or heterosexual staff only, get funding from the state. I'm sorry, but we have a culture, a democracy that believes in the rule of law, trumping, no pun intended, religious superstition. And that's just the way it is, William Barr. Tough. Deal with it. But enough of this nonsense of pitting religious people against, quote, secular elites. It's the other way around. You, white man, you grim harbinger of a dead past, trying to cling to this through this amoral pig that you serve in Donald Trump, who wouldn't know either religion or secularism, let alone science or enlightenment, if it came up and bit him in the butt. You serve this man, and you stand here seriously talking about not taking away the freedom of religion from people when this president locks children in cages, when this president banned God-fearing, law-abiding Muslims from coming into our country because he didn't like their religion. This man, who has now made common cause with Erdogan of Turkey, an Islamist terrorist-coddling dictator who is smashing democracy in Turkey in the name of creating an Islamic caliphate and arresting teachers and jailing them and having soldiers and cops who stand up against him murdered, who has now marched into northern Syria to kill Christians and Kurds who stand against him. This is the world your man Trump is comfortable with. And you're standing here talking about trying to defeat the forces of secularism, by which you really mean the forces of enlightenment and freedom and justice, which in my book mirror Christianity rather than deny it. And not because Christianity is the truth, but it itself in its best moments of moral teachings mirrors what evolution teaches, which once again is the survival of the friendliest, and which is cooperation rather than domination. This is what you're standing up against. So be honest and just tell us what's really on your heart, and that is desperately fighting for the continuation of the political power of Donald Trump and the Republican Party.
If these measures are successful, those with religious convictions will become still more marginalized. I do not mean to suggest that there is no hope for more renewal in our country, but we cannot sit back and just hope that the pendulum is going to swing back towards sanity. As Catholics, we are committed to the Judeo-Christian values that have made this country great. And we know that the first thing we have to do to promote this renewal is to ensure that we are putting our principles into practice in our own personal lives. We understand that only by transforming ourselves will we transform the world beyond ourselves. This is tough work.
Seriously? That only by transforming ourselves can we transform others? Have you ever sat in the Oval Office and told Donald Trump this? Stop raping women. Stop grabbing girls and women. Stop being a peeping Tom at beauty contests. Stop marrying more and more wives. Stop writing checks to porn stars from the desk of the Oval Office. Have you ever told this to the president that you serve and are trying to get reelected with this speech to know-nothings who think that somehow Christianity teaches hatred and that it is our right to maintain that that's a civil liberty, a religious right, that the law should be subservient to personal whim and superstition and conspiracy theories, which is all the anti-gay onslaught that you're talking about amounts to? Seriously?
Hard to resist the constant seductions of contemporary society. And this is where we need the grace and prayer and the help of the church. Beyond this, we must place greater emphasis on the moral education of our children. Education is not vocational training. It is leading our children to the recognition that there is truth and helping them develop the facility to discern and love the truth and the discipline to live by it.
How does William Barr dare to talk about the truth as a man serving a president who has done more to undermine the concept of truth with his claims of everything that goes against what he says or reveals the shallowness of his own character being fake news. This man who has done more to undermine the idea of truth, capital T, than any president who's ever sat in the Oval Office. If it wasn't so tragic for American history, one would just laugh this off. The shallowness of William Barr's intellect in defending Trump in this political speech he's giving as the Attorney General of the United States in favor of trying to rouse the Christian vote for Trump, which is all this is, and throwing around words like truth. The sad thing is that what William Barr is doing is not only discrediting the Republican Party forever, as so many Republican sycophants have done, but also discrediting Christianity. The teachings of Jesus Christ deserve a better defender than this. The teachings of Jesus that he supposedly upholds deserve a better defender than someone like William Barr, who unashamedly bandies the word education of children as the duty of the church, when there are children all over the world who are trying to survive the rape they had at the hand of priests. When his church has spent tens of millions of dollars globally trying to cover up the damage done to children by the very institutions he's talking about maintaining. The hypocrisy here is sickening.
We cannot have a moral renaissance unless we succeed in passing to the next generation our faith and values in full vigor. The times are hostile to this. Public agencies, including public schools, are becoming secularized and increasingly actively promoting moral relativism.
Moral relativism? You stand there talking about not promoting moral relativism, you who uphold and serve and lie for and twist the Justice Department in favor of Donald Trump? Have we gone to another universe here? This is beyond belief.
If ever there was a need for a resurgence of Catholic education and more generally religiously affiliated schools, it is today. I think we should do all we can to promote and support authentic Catholic education at all levels. Finally, as lawyers, we should be particularly active in the struggle that is being waged against religion on the legal plane. We must be vigilant to resist efforts by forces of secularization to drive religious viewpoints from the public square and to impinge upon our exercise of our faith. I can assure you that as long as I am Attorney General, the Department of Justice will be at the forefront of this effort, ready to fight for the most cherished of all our American liberties, the freedom to live according to our faith. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today, and God bless you and Notre Dame.
William Barr, you have betrayed your country by serving Donald Trump. You have betrayed your religion and your beliefs by serving Donald Trump. You talk about restoring traditional morality in service to a presidency that has not only undermined the United States and its government internationally and domestically, but has smashed the best of religion in America. Forever, the word white evangelical will be tarnished as the words Southern Christian has been tarnished by slavery. White evangelical will be tarnished by its support for Donald Trump. It has been turned into a personality cult which you serve. The idea that you stand there as the paragon of traditional Roman Catholicism would make any Roman Catholic who loves their church vomit. You are part of a church that had St. Francis of Assisi. You are part of a church that had Mother Teresa. And yet you stand there defending Donald Trump and trying to get him reelected by aligning yourself and your church with this vermin in human form, Donald Trump and his whole con artist family. You are the betrayer of Christian values, William Barr, by aligning yourself publicly with this man and not satisfied with that, dragging your poor, suffering church into this fight for Donald Trump. You are a betrayer of Roman Catholicism. You are a betrayer of the historic church. You are a betrayer of the values of Jesus Christ. You are a heretic.